Today, we're going to talk about a really dark, but absolutely crucial chapter in the history of psychology. It's the story of how a completely unproven and harmful theory about autism took root, caused unbelievable pain, and the incredible fight to finally overturn it with actual evidence. All right, let's get into it.
So, I want you to picture this. Let's travel back in time. It's the 1960s, and we're in a living room in Massachusetts. A mother named Clara Park is watching her young daughter, Jessie.
Now, Clara was a very bright, very observant woman, and she sees that Jessie doesn't talk, she doesn't really make eye contact, and she can spend hours just completely lost in her own world, spinning pot lids on the floor. Now, today, we would look at these behaviors and immediately think autism. But back then, the explanation was something else entirely, and honestly, it was tragic.
So Clara does what any concerned mother would do, right? She goes to the leading experts for help. And what does she get? Not support, not a medical diagnosis. She gets a psychological sentence. They told her she was a refrigerator mother. Can you even imagine that? The experts believed that she was the problem, that her intellectual nature and supposed emotional coldness had caused her daughter's condition.
So the big question is, how? How did an idea so cruel and so completely baseless become the dominant theory in the field? Well, this wasn't just some simple mix-up. This was a whole belief system, born from a time in psychology where a good story, a compelling narrative, was often seen as more powerful than hard evidence.
And what's so wild about this is the complete 180 from the guy who first described autism, Leo Kanner. You see, he actually got it right at first. In 1943, he called it an innate biological condition. But just a few years later, he's completely swayed by the theories of the time, these psychodynamic ideas, and some really flawed studies. And by 1948, he's totally changed his tune. Now he's blaming a lack of motherly warmth.
Okay, so the core of this whole thing was this really powerful metaphor. They called it psychological nourishment. The idea was that a mother's affection was literally like a nutrient for the brain. You know, like vitamin C for the body, love was a vitamin for the mind. And if a child didn't get it, they would suffer from emotional starvation. And that, they said, is what led to autism. It's a very simple story to understand, right? The only problem? There was zero scientific proof to back it up. And believe me, this idea did not stay locked away in academic journals. Oh no, it went mainstream, big time. In 1948, Time magazine ran this huge, sensational article called Frozen Children. And that image just stuck in the public's mind. These poor kids, frozen, solid by the emotional coldness of their own parents.
So if Leo Kanner planted the seed for this idea, the person who really made it grow into something monstrous was a psychologist named Bruno Bettelheim. He took this theory and pushed it to its most extreme, and frankly, its most horrifying conclusion.
In his hugely influential book, The Empty Fortress, Bettelheim makes this comparison that is, it's just shocking. He himself had been a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp, and he drew on that experience. He argued that an autistic child withdraws from the world as a defense mechanism in the same way a prisoner would withdraw psychologically to survive the horror of the camp guards. He was literally comparing a family's home to a concentration camp. And he used these really powerful, vivid anecdotes to make his point. He told the story about a boy named Joey, a so-called mechanical boy, who imagined he was a machine powered by light bulbs and tubes. In Bettelheim's interpretation of this, he said Joey found being a human being just too painful, all because his mother had never truly acknowledged his existence. The message he was sending was crystal clear, and it was absolutely brutal.
So for decades, this was the prevailing view. And it left thousands of parents just crushed under the weight of this guilt. The change, the breakthrough, it didn't come from the big names in psychology. No, it came from the ground up. It came from the parent community itself, led by one absolutely remarkable man.
In 1964, a psychologist named Bernard Rimland published a book that would change everything. Now, Rimland was a researcher, but here's the crucial part. He was also the father of an autistic son, so this was personal. His book was this quiet revolution. He wrote it with the cool, careful objectivity of a scientist, but make no mistake, it was a direct, full-on assault on the entire refrigerator mother idea. So how did he do it? How did he tear down this myth? Well, he started by pointing out what should have been obvious to everyone. There was absolutely zero empirical evidence for it. None. He went back to those original studies on maternal deprivation and showed how flimsy and misinterpreted they were. Then he just pointed to reality. The fact that parents of autistic kids, far from being cold, were often the most dedicated, loving parents you could imagine. And most importantly,
He shifted the focus back to where it belonged all along, biology and the brain.
And this right here just lays out the massive paradigm shift he started. On one side, you have the old theory. It blamed parents, and its evidence was just stories and anecdotes. On the other side, you have Rimland's neurobiological theory. The cause, genetics, brain function. The evidence, actual empirical data. And the view of parents, not perpetrators, but people who needed support. A total game changer.
You know, he even took that awful stereotype of the cold, intellectual parent and completely flipped it on its head. He said, wait a minute, what if their intelligence isn't a character flaw? What if it's just a shared genetic trait? He basically proposed that the very same genetics that might make a parent a brilliant scientist or engineer could also, in the complex lottery of DNA, be linked to having a child with autism. It was such a radical and deeply compassionate way of looking at it.
So, Rimland kicked the door wide open. But now, science had to walk through it and give us the definitive answer.
Right. So after all those years, after all the heartache and all the finger-pointing, when scientists finally did the controlled studies, what did the actual evidence show?
Well, the findings were a total 180. A study in 1969 found that the supposed disordered thinking of parents wasn't a cause of anything. It was a direct result of the stress of being constantly judged by so-called experts. Then, a decade later, another study hammered it home. Parental stress was the result of raising a child with challenging behaviors, not the cause of them. They had the entire cause and effect relationship completely backward.
And today, of course, our modern neuroscience has put the final nail in this theory's coffin for good. We can literally see it with brain imaging like fMRIs. We see differences in the brain's social wiring right from infancy, confirming what Rimland argued all along: autism is, and always was, a neurodevelopmental condition with biological origins.
So when we look back at all of this, what's the takeaway? What's the legacy of this really painful part of history? Well, I think it's a story of caution, for sure. But it's also a story of incredible transformation. A journey from seeing parents as perpetrators to seeing them as partners.
Really, at its heart, this whole story is a huge cautionary tale. It shows us just how dangerous it is to take a theory, a hypothesis, and treat it like fact without any rigorous empirical evidence. It's a powerful reminder that in science, a compelling story is just not enough. You need the data, especially when real people's lives are on the line.
And that brings us right back to where we started, with mothers like Clara Park. Even though the world was blaming them, they never stopped fighting for their kids. They championed what Clara herself called intelligent love, which is just such a perfect phrase. It's this beautiful combination of deep, genuine affection and a fierce intellectual drive to truly understand what their children needed.
I mean, what a journey, right? It started with parents being blamed. Then, a parent who was also a scientist challenged everything with data. The scientific community eventually validated his work, and this led to the final, crucial step. Parents are now seen as essential partners and practical experts in their own child's care.
So I'll just leave you with this final thought. This whole story shows us that sometimes the job of correcting a terrible, harmful idea falls on the very people who are being hurt by it the most. And it really makes you ask a bigger question, doesn't it? Who really holds the power in science? And, maybe more importantly, who should we be listening to when the so-called expert consensus gets it dangerously, painfully wrong?